All right, we're going to move on to our guest speaker for tonight. And our guest speaker is Brian Negus. But to let you know who Brian Negus is, in case he hasn't already told you who he is. But Brian is supposed to have retired, but he's still very active on various boards, on transport boards, transport groups. And his qualifications are in civil engineering, transport and traffic engineering, and also in executive management. And Brian was the General Manager of Public Policy at the RACB, and before that he was the Regional Director at Vic Roads. Brian's a member of our club, and he is going to be, well, he is one of the PEs for next year and one of the 3 Musketeers. So please welcome our guest speaker for tonight, Brian Negus, and give him a big clap. We'll do the reactions. Give him a clap. Go on, over to you, Brian.
Right, thanks so much, Brian. Everyone can hear me? Yep. Okay, you can see the screen, hopefully? Yep, okay. So I'm going to talk about, well, autonomous vehicles, but I thought I'd start with the whole concept of automated vehicles and are we there yet? Because a lot of people really ask about that situation. And I want to go through some preamble.
Ryan, sorry to cut across you. There's no screen being displayed.
Let me just try that again.
Oh, I got it.
Yeah, I've got it.
I've got it on mine. It's okay.
Yep, I've shared
Thank you,
it.
Brian.
Yeah, I can see it.
Okay, now? Has everyone got it?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah,
okay. So, yeah, automated vehicles. Are we there yet? So what's the interest in automated vehicles? So fundamentally, what we're looking at is, if I scan down, where is this? So the challenges of a growing population is what we've been confronting in the last sort of many years. Fair to say, in the current situation, we're actually not confronting any of this congestion that we see on the screen. So we know that road congestion is down by about 70%, public transport by 80%. I saw the night on the news that actually, for the first time in about 15 years, trains, trams, and buses are getting north of 90% running on time, which has been unheard of because of the loads on public transport. So we're going through a fairly atypical situation, but once we're sort of back and we transition into normality, we can expect to see changes back to where we were. I think there might be some sort of changes in terms of the permanency of online communication. A lot of the organisations I'm involved with have been saying, hey, it's pretty convenient to actually do online communication like we're doing now, rather than a situation where we go back to normality and see crowding on public transport, crowding on roads. It takes an hour to get to a meeting, you spend 1 hour there and it's an hour to get back again. So that might change. But in terms of some of the pain points, public transport overcrowded, parking's a real issue, especially in the city area. Road safety, especially bike riders and pedestrians, so the vulnerable people in the travel community. The high cost of transport, 40% of household income normally. Right now it's not, because we're not travelling that much. Transport gaps still, and road congestion. So they're the things we're trying to deal with. So moving to the smart solution side of the equation, I'll come to the smarter cars side. But the smarter side of the networks, we see, and you'll all be familiar with all the signs now on freeways, where we get advice on lanes are closed, there's congestion ahead, what the travel time is to get from A to B. It's all now coming up on our freeway system, and including the 2 toll roads. So we're getting that information via those signs, variable message signs, VMSs they're called. And we're seeing the same situation on public transport, with signs at train stations, bus stops, and tram stops. Have all got that information, so you can see real time what the situation is for travel time. And of course, there are a lot of apps now on our phones, the Public Transport Victoria app shows you a lot of this travel time real time. We're not there totally yet with real time because some of it actually is timetable information, but all of the public transport agencies and indeed the providers, the private sector providers, are in fact providing that real-time information more and more. So the third dot point there is support smarter use of the network by connecting users with this data. So an app is one way of doing that. But what we're finding more and more now, we're getting that information in our cars. On the newer cars in the system, the dashboard, the screen on the dashboard is now able to provide some of this information. Certainly navigation systems for the navigation apps are there. And more we're seeing in the upper end cars, a lot of information on road conditions being provided. So then moving to the automation side of vehicles. So, what automation systems have we got now, or automated systems? So for those of you who have got more recent cars, that the last sort of 5 years or so, before that, not a lot of these, but autonomous emergency braking. So a car pulls up in front of you and you don't see it in time, the car actually brakes for you. And quite a few of the modern cars have that system in place. Also detects pedestrians, so it actually protects pedestrians. Lane change warning and control. So if you change lanes, you get a vibration in the steering wheel or a sound in the system, depending on what car you've got. Reversing visibility systems. Most of the new cars now have cameras, and quite a few have all-round cameras on each point of the car, so you can actually see the car itself as it travels. Blind spot monitoring. So in those side mirrors, you can't actually see the car that's in your blind spot, but in fact the blind spot monitoring gives you indication there's a car there, so don't change lanes. Fatigue warning systems are much more recent. Not many cars have got that yet. So fundamentally a camera or an infrared detection system inside the car, which if you're actually starting to close your eyes or droop your head, in fact, it will give a fatigue warning system a large alarm which will go off. And if you don't respond, it'll actually stop the car. So we're seeing that in top end, but not many yet have got that particular system. Then adaptive cruise control, fairly common now. Cruise control certainly has been around for a lot of years. Adaptive cruise control, whereby the car actually controls the speed it's going. If you come up behind a vehicle in front which is going slower, the car will actually slow down and then speed up again. And in some systems which are in the top end again of vehicles, if in fact you're trying to maintain your speed, the car in fact will indicate and it will change lanes and go around the car that's actually slower. That's pretty sophisticated end of it, but that's where we're heading at the moment. So to give you a bit of a feel for what some of these mean, active park assist is another one that's actually in many cars now, where you drive up to a location, the car, in fact, the camera system will measure the spot and determine whether you can or can't get in. You then drive up, as you can see, that blue car there, and in fact, press button B or button P for parking, and it will automatically park the car. So for those of you who have trouble parking, a great initiative. Emergency brake assist, pretty much an innovation on the autonomous emergency braking, but it actually provides a pre-braking system where the vehicle detects there's a car in front, and it actually primes the braking system. So when you actually hit the brake pedal, in fact, you get additional braking pressure and stops the car much more rapidly. So that's in quite a lot of vehicles now. Lane departure I mentioned, so that works by LiDAR on the generally mounted behind or in the area of the internal rear vision mirror, and detects the systems or detects vehicles ahead, and also detects where you are in the lane. And if you depart, gives that warning I mentioned earlier. So that's in many cars now. Certainly pretty much all the vehicles that are available now as new vehicles will have this system in them. Pedestrian avoidance, more recent, but again protects pedestrians from collision. It invokes emergency braking, and once the pedestrians are detected, and in fact will brake the car, either reducing speed or in fact stopping the vehicle if you're in danger. In fact, when I first got the current vehicle I've got, I in fact did a left-hand turn around in King Street into the pedestrian crossing. I had the green in fact, but a pedestrian didn't bother about the red man, walked out and my car stopped dramatically because I hadn't seen the pedestrian. I was looking the other way to see what vehicles were approaching on that carriageway, but the car stopped, which is really great. So then, so automated vehicles, it's really pretty much cars that have the ability to drive themselves. And it's inevitable now because what I've just gone through is the automation that we see in the vehicles that are available. So automated presences which actually happen regardless of what we do in the vehicle. So the next step then is to make those automatic so that in fact, regardless of what you're doing, in fact, they're already activated inside the car. So what is being foretold in terms of the future is this could virtually eliminate road traffic accidents. The pedestrian avoidance, the lane change warning system, the blind spot indicators will actually cut down the number of crashes that occur. But there are many legal and ethical hurdles to cross before we get there, which I'll come to. But nevertheless, we're probably less than 10 years away from a fairly progressive change in this area. The pandemic certainly has caused a bit of a blip in terms of the innovations that are being investigated, but it's probably less than 10 years away before we get to various levels of automation on the system. And of course, we've already seen Tesla trialling these situations in California in particular. There's been 2 or 3 crashes where people have been killed because we are not there yet. But it's certainly less than 10 years away, is the current prediction. So to give you a feel for the technical side of going from no automation, as you can see 0 there, down to level 5 full automation, there's a series of progressions to go through, which are really setting the technical bars for the industry to respond to. So where we're at now is level 1 driver assistance. We're partially into level 2, partial automation, as indicated by what I've just gone through in terms of what's in vehicles now. But conditional automation means you can actually sit in the car and not hold the steering wheel, set it up to go from point A to point B and what speed you want to travel, and the vehicle will take you there, but the driver needs to be alert and have hands ready on the steering wheel. Level 4, high automation. And there's debate about whether we'll actually go through level 4 or not, because it's actually the next level of that sort of hands ready, but it's actually hands off. But then full automation is total sit back, read the paper, do whatever, and the car will actually look after itself. That is, I think, a lot more than 10 years away. Conditional automation is the level which probably is certainly within 10 years. So that's where the technical specifications are really heading us, and the industry is trying to respond to those in that progressive way of implementing automation in vehicles. So in Australia, there's a lot of trials going on around the country. I'm not going to go through all the detail on that map, but as you can see from a national perspective, there's a whole lot of policy work going on and initiatives being funded. Queensland, New South Wales and Victoria have, as you can see, a number of pilots of connected and automated vehicles, of heavy vehicle priority systems, and Bosch, who's a major vehicle provider of automation, based in Australia, German parent obviously, is providing information, autonomous vehicle compliance for worldwide Bosch areas.
Yep.
Transurban, Eastlink, University of Melbourne, and indeed the RACV, back when I was there, launched a series of bus trials. So a whole lot's going on in Victoria about automated vehicles, but then South Australia, Western Australia, and even Northern Territory is doing some work in this area. So a lot of work going on to really trial what's the possibility, and importantly, what are the issues we need to be aware of to try and plug the gaps where we'll get particular issues that are a real problem. So what are the impacts of what I've just gone through? So from a road safety point of view, as I mentioned, potentially crashes could be avoided by removing the driver from the equation. A lot of us have said over the years, it's the nut behind the wheel that is the problem. not in fact the nuts in the vehicle. So removing the driver from the equation certainly has that potential. And the road safety benefits could also provide public health initiatives benefits. So reducing crashes, reducing fatalities, reducing serious injury can in fact save on public health. The technology may not be perfect, but it represents a significant improvement on where we are now. As we've seen in what I mentioned earlier, in all those current automated vehicle areas that I talked about, we're already seeing benefits in relation to crashes and indeed the protection of people. So an example, just last week I saw BMW in fact testing put out a graph on reduced claims from driver assistance vehicle technology. So what they looked at is what was the reduction in claims from collisions, what about property damage, and what about bodily injury. And as you can see there from a series of automated vehicle initiatives, so forward alerts package, which basically is that autonomous braking package I talked about, which is the second part of that. Driver assistance package, which really is about providing information to the driver about what's ahead. And then the plus package basically provides a lot of that lane departure systems. And what you can see there is quite significant reductions in the claims that are occurring. And that's a direct sort of corollary to the reduced crashes, reduced claims obviously, but in bodily injury, reduced claims, reduced hospitalisation, and reduced problems from a road safety perspective. So that's an indication of pretty good news from just the last month or so when BMW published this. So the impact on road users. So studies indicate that autonomous vehicles could free up as much as 50 minutes a day. So when you get total autonomy, you can be doing other things while your vehicle's getting you from A to B. But importantly, shared autonomous mobility could lead to a situation where we get multiple passengers using the same vehicle. Obviously not right now, because with social distancing, we're not allowed to do that. But if we get every single person in a single autonomous vehicle, congestion will be worse than what it is now. So we are seeing more and more car share systems coming online. A lot of car share companies are actually out there now spruiking their wares in terms of sharing vehicles. It's been obviously again a bit downturn right now because of the pandemic, but prior to that, and it'll come back, a lot of car sharing organisations were providing that ability, including Uber. And autonomous vehicles could enable transport and mobility for the blind, disabled, people who are too young to drive, and so it therefore greatly can increase independence. And that's really good news area for those who are dependent on other people to get around. You can do that directly by autonomous vehicles. But as I mentioned earlier, there are sort of liability and ethical issues. So for example, if there's a crash, is the occupant to blame? The automaker, because the occupant trusts what the automaker says, like the Tesla situation I mentioned earlier, because they supply the hardware and the pieces of code. So who actually is to blame in that legal area which we actually are going to get into? Now last year, Volvo said it would accept liability for accidents involving autonomous cars. Now, will that work? I mean, that's a pretty brave call, I reckon. So will it work in the context of that acceptance of liability? And a primary threat to autonomous cars seem to be non-autonomous vehicles and their human drivers, the nut behind the wheel, as I mentioned, because the current average life of a vehicle in Australian context is about 12 to 13 years. That's the average. So we've got vehicles out there that are sort of 20 years old. We've got a whole lot of vehicles which are registered as historical vehicles, and they're sort of 30, 40 years old. And there's quite a lot of those out there too. They're never going to be autonomous. So we're going to have this mixed vehicle fleet. A lot of people refer back to when we had lots of horses and carts and a few cars, and that was a mixed vehicle fleet. So we're going to get a situation where we've got the current non-autonomous vehicles and the ones that are autonomous. So a real sort of issue for us in terms of how we go forward. So to wrap up, the critical issues, regulators like the National Transport Commission, the Departments of Transport federally and in each state are looking at performance-based regulation, because you don't want to stifle the innovation that's possible in the industry, but you want to have a control mechanism whereby they prove it's safe. So it's a bit like the airline industry, where new innovations in the airline industry are not actually specified in terms of, how big the widgets have to be and how the design code goes. They're actually specified loosely, but the technology has to be proven. So in the airline industry, they have to prove it's safe in the context of how an aircraft operates. So the same sort of strategy is being pursued in autonomous vehicles. But then, as I mentioned, how would an autonomous vehicle deal with choosing between the safety of the driver and the safety of other road users? So in a last minute problem, crashing to the vehicle in front and injuring the driver, or diverting sideways, and there's dad and two kids on the footpath. So how does the vehicle actually make that choice when the driver's not in control? And lastly, concerns about hacking. We've seen that with the new COVID-19 app, which the federal government's put out. There's currently 5 million people have downloaded it, including me. But hacking and cybersecurity are issues which are in that area, and certainly there will be issues which are in autonomous vehicles. And indeed, there's been instances of hacking into vehicle systems overseas already. So, Brian, that's the presentation, and I'd be more than happy to answer any questions.
Well, thank you very much for that, Brian. It's a great talk, and let's thank Brian for his talk. So you can press the reactions button and give him a clap, or a visual clap as well too. Thank you very much, Brian. So are there any questions? Are there any questions then for Brian?